If you stripped away all the grass in the Sandhills of Nebraska, you'd have nothing but desert. That's what makes cattle production the ideal way to utilize that land. Michelle Rook takes us to the site of the latest stop on the Trust in Beef Sustainable Ranchers Tour to see the regenerative practices ranchers are using to sustain this area for the future.
Ranchers here in the Sandhills of Nebraska are preserving and sustaining this unique ecological region for the future through their many conservation and regenerative practices. The Sandhills makes up nearly a quarter of the state. It's a one-of-a-kind ecosystem as the fragility of the sandy soil makes it nearly unsuitable for the cultivation of crops.
The Sandhills is the largest temperate grassland, just the most intact temperate grassland remaining in the world.
To preserve this natural resource for the future, ranchers like Homer Buell are using regenerative practices, which also ensure the profitability and livelihood of his ranch.
It's a fragile landscape, but if you treat it right, and it can be very productive and produce grass. And really the only use for something like the Sandhills, primarily, I mean, you have a few pivots here and there, but it's primarily just the native grasses grazed by some type of livestock.
The ranch dates back to 1883 and spans nearly 15,000 acres, divided into nearly 69 subpastures with permanent fencing and water.
Our pasture size runs from anywhere from a half section down to maybe 200 acres. And maybe even a little less than that.
That enables them to rotate cattle often and allows adequate rest time for the grass. It's promoted biodiversity in various warm and cool season species so they have forage year-round and can manage through drought.
One of the main things is to move cattle. Early in the part of the summer, we don't probably have any cattle that stay more than 4 or 5 days in one pasture, and then they move on, and we'll graze a little longer, maybe a week and a half or whatever later in the summer.
Buell says they use the Texas A&M Grazing Manager program to create grazing plans and stocking rates for the 1,600 yearlings and cows they're running.
And then we adjust that based upon rainfall. And we make sure we don't overgraze at any one time, and then use that program to track how we're affecting the land over time.
And since the Sandhills don't produce hard grass, they've had to adapt their breeding program to compensate.
You've got to have cattle that have a lot of capacity so they can eat a lot of grass.
The Shovel Dot Ranch also has to continually manage one of the biggest threats to their grassland, which is cedar tree encroachment. The loss of grasslands has been escalating the last 2 decades as this native and now invasive species has spread from the south to the northern plains.
There's nothing else that has that kind of big picture impact to our production, our entire ecosystem, because you're literally losing your grassland.
In fact, Nebraska producers are losing up to 420,000 tons of grassland annually to eastern red cedars.
They remove that grassland resource, and so you're talking about a 75% loss of carrying capacity.
Ranchers can improve on that with prevention, but if they have to eradicate, it's most effective when cedars are low in density. But it's expensive, even with a 75% cost share from the Sandhills Task Force.
So you start doing the math, that's like $1,000 per acre for 1,000 acres. That's $1 million, and why that cost share is so important.
And ranchers are also collaborating on control.
Some are even doing prescribed burns as a collective group, burning across multiple properties. Others are using mechanical or just managing that fence line.
Even without woody plants, the large swings in moisture can make it tough to produce enough grass in the Sandhills, even with proper grazing management.
One of the things that is kind of a perennial challenge is matching the number of animals with the amount of forage that's out here.
The other big threat to grasslands in Nebraska is row crop conversion.
So as we lose that, we lose a lot of our biodiversity. It's really hard after you've converted the land from rangeland to cropland to bring that biodiversity back, even if you were to plant it back into grass.
While grassland management aids in sustainability, Nebraska ranchers must also manage costs and remain profitable.
We're getting down to the nuts and bolts of analyzing that data. How can we increase cattle production without increasing cattle numbers? Or how can we better our land without increasing our acres or throwing on additional fertilizers?
And I think that's sustainable. If you can show and benchmark and collect data that you are getting better every year, I think that's a huge part of the sustainability story.
The long-term goal is to preserve the Sandhills and their way of life for the future.
So sustainability for us is just keeping the 5th generation here, the 6th, the 7th, and the 8th. And we try to make all our decisions based upon long-term what will be good for everything we manage on this ranch.
I'm Michelle Rook for U.S. Farm Report.
Thanks, Michelle. Well, it's a barn that's more than a barn. It's now iconic. From the Farm is next.